Flushing, Queens, and also based in Oakland on Ohlone land. We'd love for all of you here today to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you want to share your name, your pronouns, your organization, where you're joining from today, and if you feel open to sharing something that inspired you to be here with us today. So we want to open up our event with a quote from Bell Hooks, who transitioned yesterday. She wrote, "Solidarity is not the same as support. To experience solidarity, we must have a community of interests, shared beliefs, and goals around which to unite and to build sisterhood. Support can be occasional. It can be given just as easily withdrawn. Solidarity requires sustained, ongoing commitment." So let's all take a breath together in silence to honor the passing of a beloved writer and teacher whose teachings have shaped so many of our consciousness and the work that we do today. Thank you. So I share this quote because LUNAR was born out of a commitment to solidarity. We understand solidarity as a practice of mutual support that's demonstrated through tangible and material actions. And this has been a guiding value and principle in our work. And we'll continue to circle back to this theme of solidarity throughout the event today. For now, I want to acknowledge the land where Yichan and I are based, which is unceded Huichin territory, and it is the land of the Ohlone people. I also want to lift up an important message from our sisters at Sogorea Land Trust and other Native and Indigenous groups, which is that land acknowledgements on their own are not enough. There's a call to go deeper, to redistribute resources that have been stolen and extracted from Native communities. We have heard this call to move resources, and that is a large part of why we are all here today. We're joined today by several dear friends and supporters, and we'd like to introduce the first three of those, our co-sponsors of today's event. We have Suk Ri from APIP, Maria Nakai from Justice Funders, and Manisha Vaze from Neighborhood Funders Group. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you so much, Yichen. It's really an honor to be here with the two of you and for this beautiful community that folks are building together. So hello, everyone. And on behalf of the three co-sponsoring organizations, Justice Funders, Neighborhood Funders Group, and APIP, I want to welcome you all to this timely and important conversation. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule, going into the holidays, going on winter break to be with us today. My name is Maria Nakaya. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Senior Engagement Director at Justice Funders. And I'm calling in from my home on unceded Lashan Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California. I really love that Sabrina brought in the spirit of Bell Hooks to our event already. I'm definitely thinking about her a lot today. May she rest in power. And I'm sure that many of you are as well. Her work and her words really, including those that Sabrina just shared on solidarity, are really resonating with me today. As we've gathered to learn about and take action in support of the work of LUNAR in building Asian, Black, and Indigenous solidarity. Right now, we're in a time of increased racist, white supremacist violence against Black, Indigenous, and all people of color communities. And while this is concerning, to say the least, we're also seeing incredible demonstrations of solidarity across communities and across movements. We're seeing concrete, community-led solutions to keeping our folks safe and creating the conditions that all of us need to thrive. So while our extractive capitalist economic system continues to simultaneously exploit us and pit us against one another for the sake of profit, our communities are responding by doing what we've always done, which is reimagining and proactively building a society that is rooted in solidarity, cooperation, and putting people and relationships first. And because this is a thing, I think it's important to acknowledge that philanthropy is a product of the extractive economy, which means that we really have to build and flex new muscles for how to operate in ways that are different, that are new, that challenge the status quo. So while our sector has made some progress over the past couple of years in confronting systemic racism and mobilizing grant dollars to Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, we still have a long way to go. We've only just really begun to scratch the surface in recognizing and resourcing BIPOC-led organizing, movement building, and cross-cultural solidarity that is needed for our collective liberation. So we know that philanthropy can and must do more. And because you're here today, we hope that means that you're ready to roll up your sleeves and take action with us. So thank you again so much for joining us. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic on to Manisha at NFG.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Manisha Vaze. I'm the director of NFG's Funders for a Just Economy program. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Tongva and Quiche land here in South Central Los Angeles. So Neighborhood Funders Group has been around for 40 years, and more sort of as our organization has evolved, we've really taken to heart the care and the community that it requires to actually organize funders to move money towards justice. And, you know, I don't want to take too much of your time today, so I'll come back towards the end. But the words of bell hooks are really resonating for me today as well, as it is for many of you. I come back to All About Love, I think once a year. And to me, LUNAR is part of what Belle talks about when she talks about interconnectedness and love towards action. And so I feel really inspired to be here with you all today to celebrate and to help to kick off LUNAR as we see this as an embodiment of this practice. You know, coming from a South Asian family that immigrated to this country, you know that I wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the actions of solidarity of Black, Indigenous, and people of color throughout the centuries here on this land. And so it's really inspiring to see a culmination of some of those things in the ways in which movement continues to struggle. And hopefully, as we in philanthropy continue to do our work. So I'm going to actually go ahead and pass it to Suk to share more about some context and framing.
Wonderful, thank you. Good morning or afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Suk Ri, Vice President of Programs with APIP, Asian American Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. Today, I'm a guest on the island of Maui, which is part of the larger territory recognized by Indigenous Hawaiians as their ancestral grandmother. I recognize that these lands were yielded by their queen under duress and protest to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people, and that Hawaii remains an illegally occupied state of America. Colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, and institutional racism, it's like the air we breathe and the waters we swim in. Their structures hide in plain sight and are part of the landscape in which we must navigate. In this ecosystem, we also have the bedrock of self-determination and worldviews that existed separate from and in resistance to colonization and violence. And we all have our own stories to tell. In March of this year, APIP put out a call for solidarity and collective action. And like for many communities, it was not the first time. Violence against our bodies, mind, spirit, dignity, culture, our humanity has been a tool to subjugate, harm, and kill. We stand up for ourselves and each other. And there's nothing deterministic about what you stand for just because of what you look like or where you're from. What you see often depends on where you stand. And for those of us within the institutions of philanthropy, we have to work daily to keep our perspective and focus. We work in philanthropy to expose many truths, including reports like APIP Seeking to Soar. But communities can tell you what they are experiencing without a report. Communities experience every day the incredibly low levels of investment through institutional philanthropy. only 0.2% for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, only 0.4% for Native Americans, 1.3% for Latinos, and only 1.8% for Black communities. Only 6% of total philanthropic dollars supports racial equity work, and only 1% supports racial justice work. Following APIP's call for action and solidarity, we also released a report called Collective Good with recommendations crafted by many of its signatories. Central to the report, and also central to APIP's evolution over 30 years, is the recognition that we are all interconnected. The fights against anti-Blackness, erasure of Native Americans, vilification of Latinx communities are essential to our liberation as well. The language we use in common spaces in 2021 is different than even a few years ago. Decades ago, we may have used more oblique language, and generations ago, coded language and even poetry. But if you examine our stories, our songs, and the things we pass down to each generation, you will see communities coming together despite every effort to keep us apart. The LUNAR Project is a community building and investment vehicle for Asian American solidarity and participation in the movement for Black and Indigenous-led liberation. During this moment of escalated violence against both Asian American and Pacific Islander and Black communities, the LUNAR Project, actually just LUNAR, is organizing Asian Americans with wealth to demonstrate solidarity for those within the broader AAPI community who are experiencing the greatest oppression, and with Black and Indigenous communities that have been most impacted by racist and gender violence in the United States. Please give LUNAR Project your ear. Please give LUNAR your ears, and let's do all that we can to help them succeed. And I'll turn it over back to Yi-Chen and Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Suk. I am also just aware of the time that is moving. And I was wondering, Brandon, if we want to send out the new link now and we can all kind of migrate there.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm so sorry. I upgraded our plan and it's not showing up in the back end. I apologize to everyone on the call. Let me just give me 1 second and I'll share the link.
It is all good, but just a heads up for everyone on the call to just look out for the new link in your emails and then we can all rejoin.
I'll drop it in the chat as well before we sign off. While we're waiting for that, I just wanted to thank Maria, Manisha, and Suk for setting that really important context for this conversation today, and just for being such wonderful collaborators to us. The history and the context that Suk shared is foundational to the work of LUNAR, and we really see our work as building on the very rich legacy of Asian and Pacific Islander philanthropy and giving circles that APIP created space and paved the way for over the past few decades. So thank you.
And maybe we can share a little bit more while we're waiting too, a little bit about our name and why we call ourselves LUNAR. So for folks on the call who don't know, we named ourselves LUNAR because we were inspired by the moon, which serves as a guide for direction and time for many Asian and Pacific Islander cultures. And we also draw our inspiration from generations of Asian American activism and solidarity building, including our ancestors. For example, Grace Lee Boggs, Yuri Kochiyama, and countless others, including those who were not named in history. We recognize our communities have a complex history of both anti-Blackness and anti-racist solidarity, and we exist in those, in that nuance.
So we'll go into more depth on this when we hop in the new Zoom, but I'll just say as a preview that we founded LUNAR in 2020 in response to 3 calls that we heard from Asian American and other BIPOC leaders around what was needed at that time and also now to continue to sustain the level of political activation, leaderful movement building, and mass participation in racial justice movements that we've seen over the last year or two. So I'll just keep going then until we get the new link. So the first call that we heard was really from our own Asian American community. And as uprisings for racial justice kicked off across the country in response to so many incidents of police violence against Black communities, many of our own Asian American friends and family reached out to Yi-Chen and I to talk about how to get involved and engaged and activated. The second was a call for solidarity. So racial justice movements have been calling on white folks and also non-Black people of color to take a stronger stand in solidarity with the movement for Black lives, to reflect on ways we've been complicit in anti-Black racism, and to use our power and privilege in service of Black liberation. Some movement leaders that we spoke to lifted up a specific need to organize and grow the political and resource base of progressive Asian Americans, and especially a younger generation with wealth. And the third call that we are responding to is a call for resources. Black and Indigenous movement leaders have been super clear and articulate in their demands to mobilize greater resource towards racial justice and liberation, especially for long-term movement infrastructure and greater community ownership of land and other assets.
So Sabrina and I really began to collaborate in response to these community calls. She works in philanthropy at a community foundation and myself at a private equity impact investing fund. Our two sectors collectively manage over $6 trillion of capital globally, but really rarely ever collaborate to align our strategies for large scale systemic change. And we thought that that should change and that needed to change. We were brought together during our time in the Just Economies Institute, a fellowship program for financial activists where we met. And I'm just seeing a note from Brandon right now, so I'll take a pause here. Okay, great, that sounds awesome. So it sounds like we'll just wait until this expires and come back onto the same link. Okay, thank you, Brandon. Oh, and it's been upgraded. So now we don't need to hop off.
We're all set. Thank goodness. I'm so sorry.
That is awesome. Yay. Thank you so much, Brandon. We appreciate everything that you and APIP have done just to host this space for us too. So it is all good and it worked out perfectly. So thank you again. Back on the LUNAR train. So LUNAR really represents for both Sabrina and myself what we believe is our highest value contribution to the movement and funding ecosystem at this time. Our relationships and work with the Asian American community, our experiences raising and moving capital, and our shared commitment to racial justice is coming together in a way that feels more integrated than anything we've ever done before. Because we're able to move between the often siloed worlds we exist in of philanthropy and impact investing, of Asian American and other BIPOC communities, of the activist and the funding spaces, really to unlock the largely untapped capital and resources that can exist within and among in service of racial justice movements. So we see our work really as equal parts community building and an investment fund. Our community organizing model takes the shape of a giving circle program where 10 to 12 Asian Americans make a commitment to spend 3 hours a week together for 12 weeks learning about solidarity. And each of them contributes financial resources to a pool of $100,000 to be distributed, while we as LUNAR also fundraise for matching funds. This is a very involved giving circle model where folks engage in deep personal reflection with each other on their own experiences with race and racism, and give the opportunity for them to be in dialogue with Black and Indigenous movement leaders, all for the purpose of ultimately building a way to move the money in a reparations and wealth redistribution framework that is also co-created by the group as the weeks go on. So we were very explicit from the beginning of the program that Sabrina and myself did not give, and we're not providing a template for the group on how to move the funds, but that the 12-week process was exactly about figuring all of that out. And so with that said, we are very excited today to publicly announce our first grantees that came out of this 12-week process. The Black Cultural Zone and Sogorea Land Trust, who we acknowledged earlier. I really just want to take a moment right now because our words are just not enough to describe the process that this group went through and the intention they put in to be in relationship with these organizations and identify them. They are two incredible grassroots and place-based orgs that we have had the deepest respect for and also invited to share their work with the LUNAR community during the Giving Circle. And we've also been in deep conversation with them about LUNAR since our inception. So this is a huge milestone for our journey, and we're very proud of these first grantees and the work it took to get to this point. For some background context, the group decided to move all of the money as grants to two organizations, one Black-led and one Indigenous-led, and they specifically chose to fund fewer groups so that they could issue larger grants that these organizations could leverage for greater dollars. So we're now integrating the investment principles that came out of our giving circles to build towards a larger $20 million integrated capital solidarity fund that will resource Black and Indigenous-led movements at a much larger scale. And I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce two dear friends and co-conspirators of ours to offer their reflections. Holly Lee, one of our inaugural Giving Circle members, to share her experience, and Nikki Piratos with the Tiwehe Foundation to share about her collaboration with LUNAR. So welcome, Holly and Nikki.
Hi, everyone. I think I get to go first. It's so nice to see you. I see some Asian Women Giving Circle sisters on the call. I think Shin is on, and Angela and Joyce is maybe joining, and also LUNAR Project sibling, Janelle, and Yichen and Sabrina. It's so nice to see you guys as always. So my name is Holly. I've been around the sector for a while. I've been a fan of APIPS for it seems like a million years. Hi, Pat. Hi, Sook. And I had the great honor and pleasure to be part of the LUNAR Circle's inaugural, I guess, circle, LUNAR Project's inaugural circle. And so tiny bit about me, I was part of a GET, which is a Korean shared savings circle that many of you on the call might know about. And shared savings circles exist in pretty much every culture that human beings have ever been part of ever. And that, taking that idea, I sort of turned that into the Asian Women Giving Circle. And in about 16 years, I think, the Asian Women Giving Circle still exists as an all-volunteer group of friends, and we've moved well over $1 million now to projects led by Asian American women and gender expansive folks in New York City who are using the tools of art and culture to bring about progress, equitable social change. I also got to be part of the teams that helped build the Donors of Color Network and philanthropy together, which have been just like super joyous parts of my professional life. And one of the main things I've learned from these experiences is that all of us come from cultures of giving. There's also cultures of scarcity in many of our backgrounds, but all of us come from cultures of giving and generosity too. And so one of the things I'd like to ask all of you on this call is, what's yours? What did you learn from your moms and dads, ancestors, grandmas, grandpas, patriarchs, matriarchs in your family? What's your culture of giving? I heard about the LUNAR Project, as it was called then, and the Giving Circle from several people in different parts of my life. It was one of those things where like the universe is telling me something. So when I found out about it, of course I had to join because I'm kind of a Giving Circle junkie, honestly, and I'm a big fan of collective giving and collectivizing our efforts. I was thrilled to to get to meet other people across the country who had shared values with me. And Yichen and Sabrina asked me to share some logistics and to give you guys a little flavor of what it was like to be part of this circle. So imagine in your life, like I know all of you guys are way too busy with everything that you do. And imagine someone says to you, hey, would you like to be part of a 3-hour Zoom call for 12 Mondays in a row and do homework in between and go to extra webinars and have buddy calls? And, you know, it was kind of insane when many of us on this first circle were like, what? I can't believe we said yes to this. But you know what happened is that actually we kind of wanted more. I mean, it seemed impossible to put that into our lives, each of it, like shoehorn that into, just imagine doing that into your life. But by the end of it, we wanted more because the promise of that relationship building and the promise of a collective community of people around, of some shared lived experiences, but not all, but some, and building something along a shared set of values was so precious that we wanted more. There at the first circle comprised 11 Asian American women and gender expansive folks. In our cohort were artists, an asset manager who's inspired by dirt and soil, development directors, writers, self-professed science geeks, others who were afraid of being science, didn't love those schools in high school, organizers, political activists, educators, public health expert, marketing and media folks. Each of us put, I think, 5,000 to 10,000 into the collective pot. And Yichen and Sabrina just shared with you where the money ended up going. It's funny because we also realized that at the end, we didn't want to get that involved in where the money went. Like we were willing to give that seed, that decision making to a subset of our group, because the most important thing to us in the circle was really just getting to know each other more and maximizing that amount of time that we had together towards relationship building. Some things that I got out of the experience, from the silly to the sublime. On the silly side, COVID era exercise tips, like check out Make Fat Cry online. It's pretty funny. Lots of webinars and resources for later, because even in that 12 weeks, it's impossible to read and see and experience everything that Yichen, Sabrina, and Litzen were able to curate for us. And thank you so much to you three for doing that for us. What a gift. I also got to get a dear photo of one member delivering extra giant squashes to their neighbors with a giant wheelbarrow. I will never forget that picture that came across my phone that day. A gorgeous graphic of one session that is a moving river of inspiration. And really fundamentally, like a desire for more opportunities to talk about anti-Blackness in our Asian American communities and families, more opportunities to talk about cross-race solidarity and community building, and the promise, the possibility of siblinghood across this country. It kind of paints a vision. It imagines a future or a reality, hopefully, that I want and that I want to work for. Why is this space important? Why are places like LUNAR important? And what is LUNAR's unique contribution to the capital philanthropic giving circle ecosystem? And I think it's community. You know, I'd love to see this community multiply, grow, and expand. You know, again, some shared lived experiences and some shared values. What can we build from that? It's a really fertile ground upon which to build and grow together. Talking about and articulating shared vision and values. It's not a small thing anymore in our lives. For those of us who don't live in college dorms anymore or go to church, say, like, where do you get a chance to do that? In your, maybe around your dining room table. And for me, that's kind of it. Political education in a common space with some, again, like I said, not all, but some shared experiences as grounding and unifying. And based in relationships, like putting the time in to get to know each other as a group of 11 people amongst and between. It's one way that we can put theory into action. You know, what does solidarity look like? Are there some building blocks of solidarity practice in this circle? Can we take these learnings and magnify these learnings and grow them into more money, more solidarity, bigger community, and more impact? So I will stop there, and I'm very pleased to pass the mic to Nikki.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll just say bonjour. Indinoe Magniduk Nikki Paratus, Indigenous Cause, Makwan Dudam, Namani, Zagigang and Dunjaba. Just Short Ojibwe greeting. I'm Nikki Paradas. I shared some things about myself in that greeting. I'm voice for Anishinaabe from northern Minnesota, and I'm coming to you right now live from Dakota and Anishinaabe homelands here in Minneapolis, and I'm gratefully surrounded by a large urban Native community. And just looking at the chat in this call, it looks like we have a lot of folks from the Twin Cities. So yeah, you know what we're dealing with here with some of this crazy weather. I'm also Bear Clan, and if you didn't know my clan, most other Anishinaabes can kind of guess it based on my traits, which include kind of, we're very protective, we're medicine keepers, community guardians, kind of a steady strength, very perseverant. And this isn't going to be a clan history or teachings, but there's so many other clans that we have, right, that can have contributing strengths and traits that our communities also very much need. Other than that, I guess I have 2 small children, and just to share, because I think this is important, that even in the day jobs that we have, many of us on this call too, and sometimes they're night jobs as well, I think it's important to note and to share that, you know, we, myself included, still regularly respond to the traumas, historical and present, that settler colonialism and Western capitalism have produced. So this could be helping a close loved one after an overdose, for the ones that live through them, helping to search for a missing relative, a rescue from a trap house or from houselessness. And I will share as well that I'm also a survivor of abuse and violence, not trying to weave a disparity narrative, but the reason I share all of that is to say, I think this context that I rarely share is really important, because many in our BIPOC communities, right, they might be a foundation leader or an investor or an organizer by day, but then they have also these other very important roles that take time and emotional and spiritual energy. And I think that translates into a lot of the work, right, and the chosen roles that we take on. And I'll be very brief here because I really just want to talk about LUNAR. But in the last 10 years, I've started and ran a federal credit union for my tribe. I've been blessed to work in some research and policy at the Minneapolis Fed on issues like capital access affecting Native America. I spent 2.5 years or so at Indian Collective, and I had the pleasure of leading the initial development of the loan fund, you know, finding projects that truly fit, you know, our kind of definition or due diligence of just and regenerative design and economies, and then brought in aligned investments and relationships. And as mentioned, I'm now at Tiwahe, which is a Native foundation here in Minneapolis. But all of this is about, right, uplifting how we can redistribute and resource, in our case, Native peoples, in this case, Native or Indigenous and Black communities and other BIPOC communities, because we know that when we're resourced, right, everyone wins. For Indigenous people in particular, we're noticing our teachings and practices are increasingly being woven into the plans for a resilient and generative future, even on a federal policy level. And what I love about LUNAR, and in particular, what I love about Yishen and Sabrina, and getting to spend some time back in September with members of their inaugural cohort, is the heart and the deep understanding that this is way more than moving money, right? Though that is very needed as well, right? Because data shows less than, I think, 2% of philanthropy goes directly to Black communities. It's less than 0.5% in Indigenous communities. So the money's needed, but it's more than that, right? And so what they've initiated here, it's solidarity, it's tangible, it's all those things, material. But like was mentioned also, it's based on relationships. And in order to, right, truly have this solidarity and participation movement for Black and Indigenous led liberation, it means getting to know us, right? Showing up for us in spaces we're not invited to, bringing us in, It's amplifying our strengths and it's amplifying our needs. It's about listening to each other, and it's about also letting each other lead. So I love all of that about LUNAR. And I'll say sometimes when I'm asked, what would you say if you're asked, what are Indigenous people's like greatest challenge? That's a big question, right? When we're asked that, but I always kind of come back to our biggest challenge is invisibility. We're othered very often, lost in data and sometimes in public and policy discourse. And one positive thing to really share is like that is shifting, right? We look at our political representation increasingly in Hollywood and other very public spaces, but you don't always see that in capital spaces. So I do think one value of LUNAR is really tying our narratives together while recognizing their differences. And like they said, we met in what is now the Just Economy Institute. In that time, Yishen and Sabrina have become good friends, colleagues, and really models for how we can support each other with our expertise, our networks, but also just like with the openness and the heart and the understanding it takes to do this work, because it's not just about the work, it's how it gets done. So I would take a long time if I shared all their contributions to some of the work I've done, but they've lent insight and support into projects. One project was like about how do you translate just the legal documents of a deal or transaction. So you take out the legalese and make it into plain language. Sabrina's like, don't start that from scratch. I have partners and resources, and I can direct you into how not to reinvent the wheel. Yishen and I have spent time talking about what an investing education session or curricula could look like for Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses, right? To help them access and demystify investor jargon, learn how to vet investors and ask the right questions to protect themselves. Because even in this impact investing community, there are vultures preying on our businesses. So these are some contributions they made even before LUNAR. And I'm almost done here, just to say there's nothing more important than meeting our communities where they're at. And this is what LUNAR is doing, and I want to see it grow. And that's why we're all here today. But I also want to see this model everywhere. I want to see this model built within existing foundations and organizations. I want to see it by new BIPOC-led funds. I think this is a good standard for how we can work in solidarity and as relatives. Like when I opened, I said in Dinoe Magnaduk, that's relatives. So we're not just allies, but we're relatives in this work. And so my charge is I'd love to see how LUNAR could operate in other places, even outside of the Bay Area, like here in Minneapolis. We have many folks on this call, but I'd also love to see how existing funds or new ones can be more LUNAR-like. So just wanted to say, Chimagwech, much appreciation for you and everyone that you've brought together.
Much appreciation for you, Nikki, and you, Holly, as well. Thank you so much for sharing about your experiences with LUNAR. I just want to express my deep gratitude for your partnership, your friendship. It's meant so much to have both of you along with us on our journey as we took a seed of an idea to fruition and continue to. We invited Holly and Nikki to speak today, one, because they're brilliant and have amazing stories to tell, but also two, it was really important for us to show that LUNAR is built entirely on relationships and interdependence. To us, it would be completely meaningless to do this work alone. And that's why we're also grateful for each of you that's on this Zoom today, who is choosing to be with us in community. And our greatest wish is that each of you can see a role for yourselves as well in our work and our vision. Although we started with a vision to organize Asian Americans and move money at scale to Black and Indigenous communities, as organizers at heart, we understood that we needed to start small and first and foremost with our own people. So that's why we launched with a giving circle for Asian American women and gender nonconforming folks. Those are the communities that we're a part of and are in deepest relationship with. We built LUNAR with the belief that starting with consciousness raising and personal transformation at an individual level is what can eventually lead to transformation at the community and movement level, and the type of cross-cultural solidarity and power building that's core to our vision. We believe that stronger organizing of Asian American communities will lead to more powerful multiracial movements, and that we can play an important role in that effort and that ecosystem. We know that giving circles have been a powerful community tool used throughout history in various cultures dating back hundreds of years. They're widespread, bringing together friends, neighbors, and diverse communities across the globe in mutual support and aid, sometimes as the only form of capital available to newcomers in the United States who were excluded from financial systems. The learnings from the first Lunar Circle this year showed us just how critical it is to build from the basic tenets of mutual aid, that focusing on relationships between people and how communities naturally move is the most authentic path towards developing a capital strategy that's truly rooted in solidarity. So I want to bring us back to the bell hooks quote that we opened with, which is that solidarity is not the same as support. To experience solidarity, we must have a community of interests, shared beliefs and goals around which to unite to build sisterhood. Support can be occasional, it can be given and just as easily withdrawn. Solidarity requires sustained, ongoing commitment. So for LUNAR, if we are truly doing solidarity funding, that means that if we fund an entity, we intend to be in it for the long haul with them.
Thanks, Sabrina. Our original idea for the $20 million integrated capital fund has evolved a lot through the Giving Circle process, as we've witnessed and seen the group learning and practicing solidarity together. I want to share with you guys what our initial vision for the larger fund was before we launched the first circle. So Sabrina and I said to ourselves, we wanted to use the learnings from the giving circles to build a $20 million integrated capital fund that is rooted in the practice of solidarity, racial justice, and trust, and that we will deploy patient, flexible, integrated capital to Black and Indigenous-led organizations, businesses, and community developments. And the fund would be governed by a community advisory group of Black and Indigenous movement and community development leaders. That was our original intention. And as we went through the 12-week program, that initial concept really started to take shape. Our belief that the Giving Circle would help us prototype towards a larger fund actually started to materialize. The conversations that were coming out of the group, what they were struggling with, what they were thinking through, was telling us what we would need to do as funders to really make this vision a reality. And so I'm really excited to share with you all some of the most critical learnings that came out of the Giving Circle program and how those learnings can guide the work of solidarity funding. So the first point, which has been echoed by many people on this call already, is that the money part is important, but it's not the most important piece. The more important pieces were the collective decision-making, the desire to be in relationship with local organizations, and the importance of not burdening any organizations that they would fund with onerous reporting requirements, et cetera, and the process by which we engage the organizations, among a list of many other how the money is moved considerations before we even got to the how much of the money, which is a very, very far departure from most of the philanthropy and investment spaces that we operate in. The second point was actually a question. what personal commitments can we make alongside the financial? So this is one of the most exciting insights for us to see, because our group was very focused on being authentic in the way that the money was distributed. This meant thinking very deeply about what long-term commitments we could offer the organizations that were being funded. So as they thought about building long-term relationships with the Black Cultural Zone and Sogorea Land Trust, the money alone really didn't seem to be enough. So our circle members began to push each other to think about ways in which could we potentially volunteer with our grantees and or other local organizations that shared similar values on a sustained long-term basis. Did we in the circle have any resources or professional experiences that match the needs of the organizations? And in what ways could we spread the word of their work back to our respective communities? Was there ways in which we could leverage our collective voice as 11 Asian American folks coming together to practice solidarity, to champion their work and their cause? And next, another point that we learned was learning to move at the speed of authentic relationship building. So this has been brought up multiple times today as well. But at the beginning of the Giving Circle, probably around week 2 or so, one of the members introduced this hand gesture that we could all use when we needed to slow down the pace of the circle. I see Holly smiling, and I'm sure Janelle is as well. Because as we were going through some of these really difficult topics, sharing our own money stories, learning about reparations, it was very easy to allow the curriculum to kind of take the forefront and just talk and talk and talk about content. And so folks really wanted to slow down. And by week 9 of the program, Sabrina and myself thought that, we would be in a position to make a funding decision as we were 3 weeks out from the end of the program. It's 12 weeks. We got to flow the money. And we tried to get the group to agree upon an investment framework. And when we introduced that, we were met with this slow down finger from the full group. They didn't feel that they had established enough of a relationship with each other to make decisions, and that we really needed to collectively slow down and figure out what we were doing together, understand, and begin to really align on a shared definition of solidarity. And so we listened and we slowed down. So we did. And lastly, this point about continuing to wrestle with what the role of capital could be in a solidarity practice. So we'd been in conversation with the Black Cultural Zone and Sogorea Land Trust around their needs, and understood their various visions and kind of meeting them where they are in their current operations. So for the Black Cultural Zone, we had been discussing and talking about this vision around connecting various cultural communities in Oakland with food events that could be spanned and sort of intertwined to share a narrative of cross-cultural solidarity and interconnectedness across the city. And we also learned about Sogorea's movement into a land title holding entity and space of their organizational development, and also all of the costs and burdens that came with that. But we learned about all these things because we had a pre-existing relationship with these groups, and one that also continued to flourish with the Giving Circle members too, and also stands today. So we don't see capital as the tool that dictates the terms of the engagement with community organizations, but we do see capital as a Swiss Army knife of sorts, where the form that it takes is able to meet communities where they are, and it's appropriate for the need at hand. So this can take the form of a grant, an equity investment, or a loan. And what we care about really is allowing for the capital to help us create the social conditions and a foundation for authentic solidarity. We've used that word many times today, but authentic solidarity to take place between Asian Americans and Black and Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Yi-Chen. That was an amazing recap of all the reflections and lessons that we have to date from the first circle. So I'm going to talk about where we're headed next. As we look towards 2022, several things are clear to us. The first is that we fully intend to continue our lunar circles and refresh the program with all of the learnings and reflections that Yichen just shared from the first cohort. The lunar giving circles are really the heart of our programming. The relationships, the learnings, the processes that have emerged from the first circle are all shaping our future direction and will form the basis of the larger lunar fund. We're planning to launch our second cohort in the first half of 2022, and this cohort will continue to test and refine our larger fund's investment thesis that authentic solidarity funding is possible when we do it relationally, when we focus on the people, and on the personal commitments that we can all make in addition to the financial ones. Another goal for this year is to build our community governance model. We started with a vision for a community governed solidarity fund. Over the past year, we've invited about 30 community leaders to be in conversation with us, with our Giving Circle members, with the broader lunar community on topics ranging from radical reparations to cultural sovereignty to food and land justice. And as we move into phase 2 of the Lunar Fund process, we plan to deepen these partnerships and invite folks in to co-create a structure for a community governed fund.
We're really excited to launch the Lunar Fund in full force in 2022. It will be modeled off of the Lunar Giving Circles, and this fund will integrate the circles model of community decision-making, apply a reparations framework, and cross-cultural solidarity funding at scale. We're deploying capital that is structured to meet community needs and make investments at a pace that honors authentic relationship and trust building between investors, community advisors, and investees. All of the insights that we learned from our first Giving Circle, because we're really in it for the long haul. And if these values and principles and practices resonate with you on this call, we urgently invite you to join us as an anchor investor, funder, or anything else. We will be raising money from values-aligned investors who are interested in making a sustained, ongoing commitment, as Bell Hooks puts it, to Lunar, and being on a journey with us to discover what it will look like to move capital according to the principles of a grassroots giving circle at scale. So one of our main goals in 2022 is to raise $500,000 of grant capital to support our operating costs. We're also launching our fundraising for the $20 million fund, and to stay true to our intention of being able to deploy capital in the most flexible and community responsive ways possible, we're raising diverse forms of capital, including grant, debt, and equity. So if you're inspired or even just a little bit intrigued by our vision, we ask that you consider a follow-up conversation with us. And we're planning to reach out to each of you who attended our event today to schedule a one-on-one in the new year. On that note, we'd like to welcome Faiza Bukhari from the Walter and Elise Haas Senior Foundation, one of our current funders, to comment on what she sees as the potential in Lunar and why Haas Senior has funded our work. Welcome, Faiza.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Yichen. It is an honor to be here with the Lunar community today. At the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, we knew that we needed to take action to address COVID-fueled anti-Asian violence and hate crimes that had been on the rise since the start of the pandemic. We were grappling with this reality as crimes targeting Asians increased by 150% in 2021. We also knew that in addition to responding urgently to the surge in anti-Asian sentiment, supporting initiatives that expanded political consciousness and political education should be part of the fund's response. And that to create deeper and more meaningful change, we needed to uplift voices that were shaking up existing narratives. This was when we met Lunar. We saw these aspects of creating deep systemic healing and change that are prioritized in Lunar's vision. We were also inspired by Lunar's focus on cross-cultural power building and solidarity through its alignment with the movement for Black lives and its efforts to invest in communities that are most impacted by white supremacy. In conversations with peers and thought partners this year, we learned that since 2020, BIPOC change makers were emphasizing the importance of creating sacred spaces where they could be creative with one another and form meaningful connections. We saw this in LUNAR's approach through their 12-week community cohorts and giving circles to cultivate new donors. And also that LUNAR creates a space to host conversations where Black and Asian leaders share stories and perspectives about resource and capacity needs in their fields. They stand in solidarity in a space of inquiry, curiosity, learning, meaning-making, and respect. They explore cross-cultural allyship and power by creating space to coordinate and represent multiple voices that elevate and center the unique experiences of Asian American, Black, and Indigenous communities to highlight examples of solidarity that really has existed for decades. So when we talk about Black communities, we are talking about very large communities that are culturally specific in their own unique ways. Similarly, Asian Americans have their own unique racial history, and the experiences of Asian Americans are wide-ranging and diverse. So in highlighting that history of beautiful solidarity, LUNAR is answering to how these communities could answer that history, could honor that history and collaborate with each other in multicultural ways. I was part of LUNAR's Black and Asian Unity webinar in September, and I'd like to quote something that Carolyn C.J. Johnson, who leads the Black Cultural Zone in Oakland, said. CJ said that to demonstrate solidarity, we should come together to show something that celebrates solidarity, something that shows beauty and love. And on that note, I would like to make a call to action and invite other funders present in this audience to join the Walter and Elise Haas Fund in supporting LUNAR's very important and needed work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Faiza, for your support and for sharing with all of us today. We launched LUNAR on the Lunar New Year of this past year, the year of the ox. And as we come up on our second year, we are progressing into a bigger and bolder phase of work and have deepened our commitments to LUNAR for the long term. As Yichen mentioned earlier, to mark our growth from a pilot giving circle to an evergreen solidarity fund and community building initiative, we've dropped project from our name and renamed ourselves LUNAR, which we think signifies more staying power. We also have a new logo, look and feel, and as of today, a brand new website that more comprehensively describes who we are and what we do. We are so excited to share this with you today. So Yichen is sharing her screen and just scrolling so you can just get a preview of what the new website looks like. And the URL for it is lunar.family, which we think more accurately represents the type of relationship that we want to be in with all of you and everyone else that we've collaborated with on our journey so far. So we're now going to transition into Q&A. Please feel free to enter any questions into the chat. We are going to start with questions that we received in advance from some of you on the event registration form.
So I'll start. One of the questions that we got was, what challenges and learnings did you have from convening the Giving Circle and doing political education? For example, how to ensure safety and support through possibly uncomfortable topics with people from varying backgrounds. This is a great question. We did quite a bit of things. I would say that it started with setting expectations for folks. So before entering the 12-week program, we started off with a pre-program one-on-one with each participant and had a conversation on expectations, and we're very frank with folks that this was a co-creative process and our first program, our first Giving Circle ever. So that Their participation was critical, and a large part of the political education program was self-reflection and understanding. So we just wanted to make sure with them that they were in a personal space where that was something that they were welcoming, that they were interested in working through any issues that would come up with an open mind and heart. And so that gave us the space to make sure that each participant was aware of the kind of space we were entering into, and that there were potentially going to be uncomfortable topics that were being raised. For example, when people were talking about their individual money stories or journeys or how they grew up relating to money. And specifically, in our very first session, we spoke on how we might address hurt and harm when that happened, and basically agreed on some norms, and also went through moments where we did have ruptures in the system, but made sure to check with every individual after, talk about it as a group, and really be respectful in the way that we engaged, as long as we assumed that there was a lot of positive intent in the space.
So another question that we received is, what are your plans and strategies to keep Giving Circle members and the cohort engaged in the LUNAR project, or generally in continuing their anti-racist solidarity journey? Also a great question. Prior to sort of developing the political education curriculum and the program that we facilitated over the 12 weeks, Yichen and I came up with a couple of objectives that we wanted to accomplish through the program. In addition to kind of like learning objectives and moving the money, there was also an objective around the relationship building, and a desired outcome for us is that the group would build relationships that would outlast the 12 weeks that they're together in the Giving Circle, and would continue post the space and the time that we were facilitating with them. And so far, although it's only been several weeks since the Giving Circle ended, we have heard from members that they have been connecting with each other across the country. There's been meetups in the Bay Area, in Hawaii, and other places. And one of the last things we did as a group was formed a couple of subcommittees that have continued to meet post the formal 12 weeks. So one of them was developing the funding proposal, which was just approved last week, which is what we shared with you today. There's another subcommittee related to fun and food, and another one that's actually developing and evolving the structure that we developed to implement in our LUNAR programming going forward. So there is an intention to find ways for Circle alums to stay engaged and connected with future cohorts, and to potentially still be able to participate in funding decision-making. So this is very much live and in development right now, as the Circle members are continuing to meet in order to figure out what some of those structures might look like. And a recurring theme that we've mentioned in our Giving Circle discussions was how members could develop and grow their own relationships with community leaders that they met through LUNAR. So there was a strong desire expressed to volunteer with different organizations, to support and participate in organizations, events, and campaigns, to donate in addition to what folks donated through their Giving Circle contributions. And it's our hope that every LUNAR Circle member deepens their engagement with racial justice organizing and continues on their political journey. I think for us, that would be sort of bottom line, the most important outcome that we are trying to achieve and that we would want to see coming out of LUNAR.
Another question we got was, how could other organizations or individuals support a greater ecosystem where you succeed and thrive? For example, do you see or foresee any gaps in education that needs to be offered, activities held, political or cultural organizing, etc.? It's a great layup question for us to answer with fund our work. But beyond that, I would say something that was very real for both Sabrina and myself coming out of the circle and the very intense process that everybody went through was that I think if more organizations could make a commitment to align their funding practices with the values and principles of solidarity and really deeply ask themselves what that means for you. I mean, it necessitates a very introspective process, right? It's not necessarily a clear or the same answer for everybody, but essentially, if we all kind of moved and tried to experiment with the spirit of what a giving circle is, of folks coming together, of investigating their own experiences, and like also what does it mean to be in a group and a collective, that would elevate the conversation of solidarity in the funding space, in the investment space, right? As Nikki mentioned. And I think that would do us all the better. Some other ideas would be to join a giving circle. It starts with you. You can start your own. And we are more than happy and excited to share our political education curriculum, the 12-week program that gives you week 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12, and topics that you can discuss, folks that you can invite in, and you can use that as a starting base. Please reach out to us if that would be interesting for anyone. And again, I think we're all here today because we believe that this work is important, and we are asking for funders to step up and to really fund this work, fund the vision of LUNAR, fund the LUNAR Fund for our ability to continue hosting and operating giving circles. And also the invitation is out there to collaborate with us as co-investors, co-funders into racial justice investments, right? Take a look at the organizations, the Black Cultural Zone, Segurate Land Trust, that our Giving Circle members have flowed funding to in this first round, and connect with us to ask us why we believe that their work is leading the charge, and why and how our individuals came to that decision.
Okay, I don't see additional questions in the chat, and I believe those are most of the ones that we received on the registration form. Yu-Chen and I are available as always to address any questions that might come up after this event. As we mentioned earlier, we'll be reaching out to each of you to try to find some time to connect one-on-one and personally in the new year. And with that, I will pass it over to Manisha, who is going to close us out.
Thank you. So in the spirit of solidarity and sustainability and all of the things that LUNAR is cultivating in community with a number of partners, I want to just underscore the calls to action that Sabrina and Ichan laid out for all of us here today. In addition to just the spirit of collaboration around like learning about the political education tools that they've developed, the curriculum, the grantees, the 2 amazing grantees, inaugural grantees of this year. There's a number of ways that you can support LUNAR. So the first one, and I'll say this twice, is that you can fund LUNAR as a seed investor of the fund. We have big goals and big dreams, and I'm so excited to see how this work will grow. So please consider funding it as a seed investor. If that's not available to you, considering the position that you're in, feel free to talk to your team about the fund. Ask Sabrina and Ichan for a prospectus, other ways to get the language, all of the things that you might need to be able to talk to folks on your team. And I would also encourage you to talk to other foundations and other people in your networks about the fund, right? So our work in our foundations, but it's also the work of organizing other funders into more spaces, right? So as you're considering doing this work, we need to be also thinking about the full community and ecosystem and philanthropy around this work. And of course, feel free to reach out to Ichan and Sabrina with your questions. They're doing this as a labor of love. It is volunteer at this stage, right? We all have multiple jobs and hats that we wear. And Ichan and Sabrina are in the same boat, but are really committed to seeing this project grow. And so feel free to reach out to Ichan and Sabrina as you are considering doing this work. So with that, I'd like to close. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm so inspired by Holly and Nikki, and really, really, yeah, happy to be in community with Maria and Suk, and of course, Ichan and Sabrina through LUNAR. I also want to give a huge shout out to Brandon, who played an amazing role today and ahead of today, planning and preparing for today, logistics and tech and communications for this event. But thank you all so much for being here, truly. I can't imagine a better way to sort of close out my year. And so just wishing you all a wonderful winter break, and hopefully you continue to stay connected with LUNAR. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You all, everyone. Thank you.